The comet. The night my husband shoved me into the iron banister at the Hartwell Foundation Gala. His mother was holding the hem of my dress between two fingers, like she'd lifted it off the floor of a clearance bin. That's the image I keep returning to. Not the pain, not the 2 ribs I didn't know were cracked until the paramedic pressed her fingers against my left side 4 hours later, but my mother-in-law standing in the rotunda of the Hartwell Grand Hotel with her Chardonnay in one hand and my dress fabric pinched in the other, wearing the expression of a woman who had suspected this outcome all along. 10 minutes after that, the woman my husband had spent 8 months trying to impress walked through the lobby doors. She didn't look at him. She moved past the donors he'd been cultivating for years, past the campaign poster mounted near the entrance, and came straight to where I was sitting on the marble floor, with a cocktail napkin pressed to my side. She knelt down. She gave me her card. She said to call her in the morning. Then, she left without speaking a single word to my husband. I watched his face when he realized what had just happened. I have thought about that face every day since. My husband is the Chief Executive Officer of Hartwell Regional Medical Group. 4 hospitals, 11 outpatient clinics, and a foundation that has carried his family's name for 50 years. His mother chairs the foundation. His uncle sits on the City Planning Commission. His great-uncle's portrait hangs in the lobby of the original hospital building, which was built on land his family donated, which was sold to them at a discount by a city alderman, who later received a consulting contract from their development arm. In Nashville, the Hartwell name functions less like a brand and more like a zoning designation. It tells you what gets built and what gets left alone. I was a forensic accountant, 8 years with a federal audit firm, 3 of them embedded with the Department of Health and Human Services, reviewing Medicare reimbursement claims. I was the person who read the part of the document everyone hoped no one would read. I was good at it. I was good at finding the number that shouldn't exist, at following the money through the door it had been told not to use. My husband said that was what he loved most about me. He said it the first night we met, at a fundraiser for the hospital's children's wing renovation. When I told him what I did, I watched half the room take a small step backward without moving their feet. He said, "A woman who actually reads the receipts. I've been trying to meet you for years." I thought he meant it as a compliment. For a while, I was right. The dress my mother-in-law picked up by the hem was a navy wrap dress I'd found on sale at Nordstrom Rack 6 weeks before the gala. It was a good dress. It fit. I had worn it to 2 work events before I left my firm and hadn't thought twice about it since. "Is this the same one you wore to the children's hospital luncheon?" she asked. She was not asking me. She was asking the 8 people within earshot. "It is," I said. She released the fabric. I do admire a woman who finds something she likes and commits to it. The sentence fell exactly where she aimed it. My husband's younger sister, a woman who had never once been outright cruel to me, but had never not been watching, drifted toward the bar. The foundation's development director developed a sudden need to check his phone. My husband moved 2 steps closer and placed his hand on the small of my back. The first second felt like support. The second, the fingers pressed in. "Don't." I picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. "The dry cleaner keeps asking if I want him to replace the lining," I said pleasantly. "I keep telling him it still does its job." Few people laughed. My mother-in-law's smile sharpened at the corners. My husband's hand relaxed. That was the architecture of our life together. Her comment, his signal, my redirection, and the laughter that reset the room, so we could all pretend the previous 30 seconds had been a misunderstanding. 3 years earlier, when my husband asked me to leave my firm, he cried, "Teams him." We were in the kitchen of the house his parents had given us as a wedding gift, and he sat at the island with his face in his hands and said the Hartwell expansion was consuming him, that the hospital's growth into 4 new markets had left him without a real partner at home, that he needed me present in a way he couldn't ask for when I was coming home at 10 o'clock and taking calls at midnight. He said the cases I worked on were not without risk. That one of the hospital executives I'd helped refer for federal investigation had made some calls to people who made other calls, and he'd heard about it secondhand, and he hadn't slept right since. There's no real threat, I told him. Our security team vetted it. You shouldn't have to rely on a security team. You're my wife. I looked at his face. His eyes were wet, his hands were shaking slightly. I had been with him for 2 years at that point, and I had never once seen him cry about anything. What kind of man would I be, he said, if I just accepted that the woman I love is in danger and did nothing? I gave my notice 4 months later. What came after arrived so gradually I mistook it for weather. Just the natural climate of a life-changing shape. 6 months after I left the firm, he added a passcode to our home router and didn't give it to me without being asked. He changed the password to our joint savings account for security reasons after a phishing attempt on the hospital's email system, and didn't tell me the new one for 12 days. When I mentioned it, he said he'd meant to. He'd been distracted. Of course, I had access to everything. I always did. He hired a driver to take me to my appointments. He said Nashville traffic had gotten worse and he worried. He began mentioning, occasionally, that my best friend, a woman I'd known since our sophomore year at Vanderbilt, had a way of winding me up before events. He suggested gently that maybe I was leaning on her too much. He began answering her calls when I left my phone on the kitchen counter. He told me once that she'd called and he'd let her know I was resting. He was always managing something. My schedule, my access, my interpretation of whatever I'd seen or heard or noticed. He had a version of every story, and his version always ended the same way, with me being mistaken, or overextended, or simply not quite seeing things clearly yet. My father had been a hospital administrator at a county medical center 40 miles outside of Nashville. He died in a single-car accident on the interstate 2.5 years ago. The state police determined he had fallen asleep at the wheel. He was 58 years old, and I had never once, not in 32 years of knowing him, seen him so much as doze in a chair before 9 o'clock at night. My husband attended the funeral. He sat beside me. He held my hand through the entire service and told me that grief sometimes made people search for explanations in places where there weren't any, and that the kindest thing I could do for myself was to accept that some losses were simply losses. I believed him. I needed to, and so I did. For a while. Love. The Hartwell Foundation Gala was the centerpiece of the fall fundraising season, and this year it carried weight beyond the usual donor cultivation. My husband was being considered for appointment to the Tennessee State Health Board, a 5-year seat with oversight authority over hospital licensing, Medicaid expansion policy, and regional grant allocation, PAR. The recommendation that mattered most belonged to the State Commissioner of Health, a woman named Alderman Farrow, who had spent 20 years as an ERR physician before moving into public administration, and who was known, by everyone who had dealt with her, for 2 things: an absolute intolerance for opaque financials and a long memory. My husband had been pursuing her endorsement since February. He had restructured his conference schedule around her keynotes. He had commissioned a community health equity report in which her policy framework was cited 14 times. He had hosted her staff for a working lunch and sent handwritten follow-up notes on personal stationery. She had not yet responded. She was attending the gala as a guest of a separate advocacy organization. My husband considered this a second opportunity. I considered it something else entirely. I had been doing my own reading, not his private files. I understood the line and I did not cross it, but in the storage room off the second-floor hallway, there were 6 boxes of documents from the hospital group's expansion period. Grant disclosures, vendor contracts, foundation disbursement reports that my husband had asked me to organize after his administrative assistant left the organization 2 years earlier. He'd never followed up. I had organized them very carefully. What I found was a structure. The Hartwell Community Health Initiative, The foundation's nonprofit subsidiary had received 9 grants from federal and state health agencies over 4 years. In each case, funds moved through an intermediary called Meridian Health Strategies, LLC, before reaching any operational account. Meridian shared a registered agent and a business address with 2 other entities, a medical equipment distributor that billed Hartwell Regional at rates I could find no comparable market reference for, and a real estate holding companies that had sold 3 parcels of land to Hartwell-adjacent development projects at prices that didn't match the assessed values on file with the county. Plaid. My father had spent his career in hospital compliance. His specialty was billing integrity. He had attended a regional administrators conference in Nashville 6 weeks before he died, a conference co-sponsored by the Hartwell Foundation. I sat with that fact for a long time. I sat with it the way you sit with something you are not ready to say out loud. Applause. I had an old colleague from my HHS years, a man named Felix, who now consulted for a healthcare fraud task force, whose number I kept buried in the notes section of a recipe app on my phone. I hadn't spoken to him in 2 years. My husband had once mentioned Felix's name at dinner, casually, the way you mention something you want the other person to know you know. Titus. I sent Felix a message on a Wednesday afternoon from the public library, while my husband's driver waited outside. Felix called me back in 18 minutes. He said he had a few questions he'd been hoping I would be the one to answer. Heaven. The gala started at 7. By 8:15, my mother-in-law had made 4 comments about my dress and suggested, to the wife of a board member, that I had stepped back from a demanding career to focus on what really matters, which takes a kind of grace not every woman can manage. The wife smiled at me sympathetically. I thanked her for the wine recommendation she hadn't made. Harem. My husband touched my elbow and murmured that I was doing beautifully. His thumb found the soft depression above the bone and pressed into it once, briefly. Commissioner Farrow arrived at 8:30. She was tall, silver-haired, and wearing a dark blazer with a single watch and no other jewelry. She spoke briefly with the event organizers and moved toward the reception area. My husband handed me his drink and followed her. Disty. I watched from across the room. She was polite. She was also moving with the steady, practiced efficiency of someone who has learned to exit conversations without appearing to exit them, and my husband was recalibrating in real time, adjusting his angle, speaking slightly faster. Her expression did not change the way expressions change when a person is engaged. It changed the way they change when a person is waiting for the sentence to be over. He came back to the table 22 minutes later and poured himself more wine. She's a slow burn, he said. She'll come around. I said nothing. During the dinner remarks, my mother-in-law stood and announced a $3 million commitment from the Hartwell Foundation to expand maternal health services across 4 underserved counties. The room applauded at length. She gestured toward my husband. He stood. He said the right things, he said. Strong communities were built on strong families, and that everything the Hartwell name represented had always begun at home. He extended his hand toward me. My wife, he said, spent years doing some of the most rigorous financial oversight work in this region, before she chose to bring that precision to us instead. I am a more careful man for it. I stood up. I smiled. I thought about Meridian Health Strategies, LLC, and the 9 federal grants that had passed through it without leaving a clean audit trail. I went up to the mezzanine level after dessert to retrieve my wrap from the coat check alcove, which was off a short corridor at the top of a half-flight of stairs. My husband followed me. No one else was in the corridor. He positioned himself between me and the door back to the landing, the way you stand when you want someone to understand that leaving is not yet an option. You've been quiet all night. I've been present all night. Those aren't the same thing. He took my phone. Not grabbed, just took it, the smooth, unhesitating way you take something you have taken before. He opened my messages, my email, a banking app under an account he didn't know existed. He found nothing. I had made sure of it. He handed it back, Felix Moreno. I kept my face still. I saw his name on your screen last month, he said. You cleared your call history. Why? I clean it out periodically. He worked federal healthcare investigations. Years ago. His jaw shifted. I am under more pressure right now than I have been in my entire career. I need to know that you are with me on this. I'm standing at your side at every event. That is not what I asked you. I looked at him. He looked back. In the space between us, I saw the version of him that only appeared when no one with a camera was nearby. The one that didn't explain itself because it didn't believe it needed to. I'd like to go back downstairs, I said. In a minute. Give me the passcode to your personal email. No. The word surprised us both. I had been approaching it for months, and it came out smaller than I'd imagined. But it came out clean, and I didn't take it back. His breathing changed. I was standing near the top of the staircase, on the landing, not on the steps, but close enough that I could see the runner, beginning on the first one behind me. Do you have any idea what you are doing? He said. The board appointment, the foundation announcement, everything we have. Everything I have built. Everything built through Meridian Health Strategies, I said. Before any of it reached an actual patient. His face went absolutely still. I did the math, I said. I did it carefully, I've had time. He moved. Both hands flat against my shoulders. Not a swing but a shove, the kind that says the conversation is over now. I stepped back and my heel caught the edge of the top stair. I grabbed for the banister and found it at the wrong angle, and my wrist bent hard against the iron railing before the rest of me followed it down. I don't remember landing. I remember carpet. I remember the strange absence of pain that precedes the real thing. I remember a sound from somewhere above me, a woman's voice saying my husband's name as a question. The voices came from above, then from everywhere. Tantum, my husband was already on the stairs. I could hear his tone shifting, from shock into management. The recalibration so smooth, it must have been waiting somewhere near the surface for a long time. She lost her footing, he was saying. She's been under a great deal of stress. She hasn't been sleeping. Someone knelt beside me. Not my sister-in-law, not anyone from our table. Commissioner. Pharaoh placed 2 fingers on the inside of my wrist, with the practiced efficiency of a person who had done it 10,000 times in an emergency room, and looked at my face. Can you breathe? Up, mostly. Where does it hurt? Left side, I think the ribs. She stood. She looked at my husband without any readable expression at all. Then she looked back at me. I'm calling an ambulance, she said. And I'd like to speak with you tomorrow if you're willing to. Deb. She said it the way someone says something that has already been decided. My husband started to respond. She had already turned away and was dialing. Behind him, I could see 2 people with their phones raised. One was a healthcare reporter from the local paper, whose face I recognized from her byline photo. The other was someone I didn't know, and it didn't matter who they were anymore. Because the thing that had been invisible for 5 years was no longer invisible. And there were witnesses. And the room had heard what he said before he shoved me, and his hands had been at my shoulders. And there were 2 cameras that had recorded all of it. 2 cracked ribs, a hairline fracture in my left wrist. Felix arrived at the hospital 3 hours after the ambulance. He brought bad coffee and a folder. Inside the folder was documentation of a federal inquiry, preliminary, begun 16 months earlier, into Medicare billing irregularities connected to several Tennessee hospital networks. Hartwell Regional was one of them. He set the folder on my tray table and sat down. Parb, your father filed a formal compliance complaint with the HHS Office of Inspector General 8 weeks before he died, he said. The record was sealed under active investigation protocol. I couldn't confirm it until tonight. I looked at the ceiling. I thought about my father calling me late one night, about 6 months before the accident, his voice distracted in a way that hadn't sounded like him. He'd asked me to have dinner soon. He said he had some professional questions he wanted to run by me. Nothing urgent, just wanted another set of eyes. I'd said yes. I'd let it sit on the calendar for 3 weeks. We never had that dinner. The truck driver, I said, that had his CDL reinstated 2 months before the crash, after a 6-month suspension for a prior accident. The company he was working for dissolved 12 days after your father died. The company shared a registered agent with a Hartwell-affiliated vendor. I picked up the coffee. It was cold. I drank it anyway. Commissioner Farrow came at 7 the next morning, with her general counsel and a yellow legal pad. She told me that her office had received a federal referral 40 days ago, that she had attended the gala specifically to observe my husband in context before deciding whether to issue a formal response to that referral or to wait for more complete documentation. She said she'd already made her decision before I fell down the stairs. What happened on the stairs gave her something additional, which was a criminal referral for a separate matter. Perm. She also told me that 3 weeks before my father filed his complaint with the Federal Inspector General, he had called her office directly and asked to speak with someone about billing patterns he'd observed across multiple regional hospital systems. The intake coordinator had taken his name and number and told him someone would call him back within 5 business days. No one had called him back. She said it without looking away. She said it the way a person says something they intend to carry for the rest of their life, as a reminder of what deferred accountability actually costs. Tessabans. My husband's statement came out the morning after the gala. It said I had suffered a fall during a period of emotional distress. It expressed his deep concern for my well-being. It asked the public to respect the privacy of a family navigating a difficult time. Read it twice. Then I called Felix. He used the word fall, I said. I noticed. 3 times. I counted 4. It's going to matter, I said, that he chose that word while 2 videos exist of what actually happened. Felix was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know. The federal investigation ran for 16 months. By the time it was complete, my husband had been placed on administrative leave from Hartwell Regional. The foundation's accounts were frozen. 3 members of the hospital group's finance line leadership entered cooperation agreements with federal prosecutors. His uncle, who had approved zoning variances for 4 Hartwell-adjacent commercial properties in exchange for what the indictment described as structured consulting payments, was charged separately. Peenem. My mother-in-law gave an initial statement saying she had no knowledge of any financial irregularities and that her son's arrest was politically motivated. Then the foundation's internal audit located a second set of disbursement ledgers in a locked drawer in her private office, and her statement changed. Driver. The truck driver testified under immunity. He said he had been contacted by a logistics consultant 2 weeks before the accident and paid to follow a specific vehicle on a specific stretch of interstate and run it toward the shoulder. To frighten the driver, not to harm him. He said he had not intended what happened. He said he hadn't known anyone would die. German. My father had been, everyone agreed, a stubborn man. The prosecutor used that word with genuine respect. Stubborn enough to keep a copy of every document he submitted, and to mail a second set to an address I found, after the trial, in an envelope he'd left with a neighbor for safekeeping. Stubborn enough to keep making phone calls even when no one called back. I sat in that courtroom for 11 days and thought about how he used to tell me that the institutions that demand the most trust are exactly the ones that require the most watching, and that the watching was not cynicism. It was the point of the whole thing. He was the most inconvenient person in any room he decided mattered. I think about that every single day. My husband received 13 years, healthcare fraud, federal conspiracy, obstruction, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit an act of intimidation, resulting in a fatality. His attorney argued that last charge was prosecutorial overreach. The judge did not agree. The My mother-in-law received 5 years and a permanent bar from serving on any board of a federally funded nonprofit organization. Heavy. I sat on a concrete bench outside the courthouse on the afternoon of sentencing with my best friend beside me. The woman my husband had told me was a bad influence, whose calls he had occasionally answered and intercepted, who had kept calling anyway for 3 years, because she said something about the way I sounded on the phone hadn't been right, and she didn't know what it was, but she wasn't going to stop checking. She sat next to me in the cold November sun and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "What do you want?" Thought about it. I thought it the way I hadn't been allowed to think about things for a long time, without checking first to see if the answer was acceptable to someone else. "I want to go back to reading the receipts," I said. She nodded, like that was exactly what she'd expected. The forensic accounting practice I opened 8 months later was deliberately small. 2 associates, a contract attorney who specialized in whistleblower cases, a focus on healthcare compliance referrals from patient advocacy organizations and legal aid clinics. Commissioner Farrow's office sent us our first case. It was a billing pattern at a rural clinic network that had been generating patient complaints for 3 years without triggering a formal review. We documented it in 9 weeks. The resulting federal settlement returned $4.2 million to the Medicare Trust Fund and led to a change in management. I didn't put my name on the press release. The work was the point. It had always been the point. The press release was for other people. PB. On a Tuesday morning in February, with the window cracked and my coffee going cold, I opened a new referral file. Inside was a spreadsheet of transactions, each one paired with an explanation that didn't quite match the numbers it claimed to describe. I uncapped my pen. I drew a circle around the first one. Then I started reading.